Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to Molten Modular. Today I'm reviewing the RYK M185 Sequencer. It's not a catchy name, but it is an extraordinarily creative, versatile, interesting and devastatingly dark sequencer. It has a bit of a history, if I can remember this right. Jake from RYK built the original M185 sequencer for his Roland System 100 modular that he was playing with, because the sequencer within that Roland system was a simple 8-step, I think, sequencer with 8 knobs. You set knobs to pitches, pitches came out, and off you went. Note after note, 8 notes, round and round you go. Now that's a very familiar theme in Eurorack sequencing. You often get 8 notes, 16 notes, going round and round and round, and that's good. That can be awesome, but it's also perhaps not as awesome as you'd like it to be. I mean, when you look at other bits of hardware, other drum machines, groove boxes, simple things like the TB303, they sequence, but they also have remarkable revolutionary ideas like pauses or gaps, rests even. Perhaps that's the word I'm looking for. They have rests and repeats and other bits and pieces going on that go beyond just 8 notes, 4 notes, 16 notes, cycling round. And so that is what Jake was trying to capture. Something more than just 8 notes. Something to put some rhythm, some gaps, some space, some development into your sequence. And so he built this thing in Roland System 100 format and played around with that, and it was great, and he had a lovely time. But then a company called IntelliGel spotted it and went, that's really interesting. Maybe we could use that for something in Eurorack. And so they bought a license of Jake and they built the Metropolis. Now the Metropolis is a very well regarded sequencer. It's awesome. It's out there being fabulous and has been for quite some time. If you're interested in that sequencer, then do check out Milo Melody's video on it, because he completely aces how you use it. And it was that video that got me interested in this, because I've always been interested in the Metropolis. It's just a bit big, a bit expensive, a bit kind of overpowering, I felt. So when the M185 came along, it just sort of popped up and I thought, that's really interesting. That's a bit like the Metropolis. Oh, it is the Metropolis. In fact, it is the thing that the Metropolis is based upon. But not only that, in this version, Jake has taken his original idea and developed it. He's pushed it on. He's pulled out some kind of dual channel magic and put in some other ideas as well that the Metropolis doesn't necessarily have. It's also kind of simpler, more compact, cheaper, and all of the good things that we like to hear when you're comparing modules. So I jumped on it pretty much immediately. I mean, I bought one. I bought my own. This is not sponsored by RYK. They haven't sent me the module to review. I bought my own, and I bought the kit version. And I did a video on the entire build, which you can go and check out, which is in the channel, which was very, very interesting, if I say so myself. But anyway, so this is my module and my review of it, unfettered by any other kind of bias or influence. But is it any good? Yeah, I think so. It's a little hard to explain. I mean, Milo Melodies did a great job on the Metropolis, and definitely for more and a different approach to looking at it, then do go and check that out. But I'm going to do my best to try to show simply, not in a big environment, in a simple, close environment with a couple of oscillators, a low pass gate and a little bit of reverb. I'm going to attempt to show what this fella can do, because it is amazing, and you can lose yourself for hours in this thing, which is to me is always a sign of a good module. I mean, with it, I've got it set up in a little case with just a few bits and pieces. As I say, I'm not going to try to patch it into a whole universe of things. Just going to keep it simple. Hopefully I can give you some idea of what this thing is capable of. So that's the plan. Come with me. I will bring you in close. We will have a look and see where we get to. So here it is, the M185 sequencer. You have 8 steps and 8 pitch knobs for those steps. You've got some weirdness in the middle, got some nice lights, and at the bottom you've got some gate length, you've got how many steps, you've got some Portamento, and you've got the tempo. Some start, stop, reset, forwards and backwards, and some other bits and pieces, and you've got CV and gate outputs. It's very simple, very straightforward, but it's this bit in the middle that makes it interesting. Because the way this sequencer works is that I am sorry. I am sorry about the cockerel. There's nothing I can do other than strangle the thing. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm just going with it. Just going with it. Thank you. So each of these steps is called a stage, and within each stage, 8 stages, you can have up to 8 repeats. So you kind of end up with 64 steps, although not exactly, because each stage can only have one pitch, and so it's still 8 steps, just with lots of internal repeats. This isn't making any sense. Why don't we have a look at this bit? So this bit sets the gate mode. You can either have nothing going on with the gate, you can have one note, lots of notes, a note on off, a note on off, note off, a random or a tide. Are you getting all of this? Alright, I'm going to have to just try to show it. So for our first note here, I'm going to turn on a gate. And there it is, there's our note. That's easy, I can do that for all of them. And then what you can do, you can push that back up to turn the gate off. And you get a lovely rhythm, just like that. And this, simply, just by itself, I've got 8 notes, I've got on and off. I mean, if you're just using these top two gate modes, you already have a brilliant, fabulous little Eurorack sequencer that does far more than a lot of other sequencers that I've played with. But it starts getting more interesting when you introduce repeats. So if I put this one down to 2 repeats, it's now repeating this stage twice. But you're not really getting a sense of that, you're just getting a kind of a delay. So if I put it down to the next gate mode, this is going to fire gates on every pulse. And it will continue doing that as I increase the repeats. So I put in 3 repeats, or 4, or 5. Now the gates are cleverer than that. It's not just on, off and always. You can stick in an on, off, or an on, off, on. Or an on, off, on. If you start introducing that somewhere else, so that's a general idea. General idea is that you mess about with the gate patterns and they produce interesting rhythms and evolve and change the melodies as you're using them. So come back to something relatively simple. The one at the bottom here is a tie. Introduce a little bit of Portamento. course have gate time control here for increasing the gate. On the note for this, I'm plugged in over here to a low pass gate, the pinhole here from tenderfoot. Because when you're using gates, you need something which is just going to be a bit of a VCA. You want to open it up and close it again. If you're using an envelope will just be triggered and then will do its own size of thing in opening up a VCA and closing it. So using something like a low pass gate gives me a kind of an organic, bouncy sort of sound which responds to the length of the gate coming out of the sequencer. The other one you got down here is of course a random, so it will just select whatever gate mode it fancies. Pull these down to 4. So I keep knocking the oscillator. Just while we're here doing this, there's a little switch down here to which I can turn on and off the Portamento. So if I knock that across one, see all these lights have come on, I can then take out Portamento for everywhere except for where I want it to be. There are standard controls, like you can go forwards and backwards in a ping pong styling. Or you can go random. And then this last option here is for setting a fixed sequencer length. Now why is that interesting? Well, it's because you may have noticed as you start changing the repeats, your sequence gets bigger and smaller depending on what you're doing. So you've just got 8 notes going on, It is, under normal circumstances, 8 notes long. As soon as I put in something else, as I put in a repeat, that sequence is getting bigger. And perhaps it's no longer fitting in with whatever else you've got going on. You might have a drum machine or something else which is following along and is now completely out of sync. Of course, that might be what you want. Anyway, so if you put it onto fixed length, it's now going to be set to a fixed number of pulses and will always stay that way. And that's dictated by your stages knob here. So at the moment, each stage is worth 4 pulses. So if I put it down to 1, it's going to run for 4 pulses. There you go, 1, 2, 3, 4. And as I change these 4, it's going to continue doing 4 pulses. So if I add a repeat here, it's only going to do 3 because it's now doing 2 here. If I add another one in there, it's now only going to do these 2 because there's 4 pulses in total going on. There's still only 4 pulses here. Ooh. That's quite nice. So I can dial that up 1 to make it 8 pulses. Or stick it up a bit more to 12 pulses. And so on. Because it's on 16 pulses and I've got it on 2 on each one, so it's doing the whole line. As soon as I introduce something else, you lose a little bit at the end. I think that's brilliant. That's totally brilliant. Now if I turn it back to normal mode, it's now the number of stages is dictated by the stages knob again, so I'm down to 4, but it's always going to play each of these 4 stages no matter how many notes I put into each one. Which is a very different feel to having a set or fixed sequence length. Are you with me so far? Are you with me? The repeats, the gate modes, these two things interacting, whether you've got it on standard mode where it just keeps playing all the way along, or fixed length mode, which I think is interesting and is probably going to become more useful as you start mapping it into other things. Now, so far we're just using one oscillator, one channel of 8-step sequencing. Let's introduce another one, shall we? Because this is a very clever way of splitting itself into two sequencers. Now to do that you need a special cable which comes with it, which is this one here, which gives you a stereo jack to two mono jacks. And you need this because the second channel output is on a single thing here. Now I'm not entirely sure what it is about the layout of the PCB, or just something to do with symmetry that means that it had to be packed into a single socket and you couldn't just have a second channel of gate and CV. But whatever the reason, this is what we have. And so to access the second sequence, you need to use the supplied cable. And that gives you CV and gate. I can't remember which way around, so we better just work that out. So there are two dual sequencing modes within the M185. One of them uses two oscillators using the two outputs. The other one uses the same sort of idea, but to manipulate one sequence coming out into our original oscillator. Let's do that first, I think, and then move on to using two oscillators in a second. So what you do is you go across to, on this middle slider, to the 3 stars. You set a split point. So I'm going to set a split point on stage number 5. So you're going to get sequence A this side, sequence B this side. I then, for serial, is what you do is you say how many repeats you want for your first sequence and then how many repeats you want for your second. So if I go up to, say, 5, 6, if I go 7, if I go for 7 for the first one and then 1 for the second, what will happen is, when I go back to the serial switch, is that this sequence will repeat 7 times and then we'll get the other one. Are you getting it? Of course, as you start introducing other bits, it's going to throw the timing off, but then you can just find something interesting within that. It's a brilliant way of having a kind of, well, not necessarily a verse and a chorus, but a line going on which then changes at the end and then comes back in again. So the 7 repeats and 1 repeat is brilliant at that. But you could also have it for 6 notes and then just do 3 of those and 2 of those, or have it for 3 notes and 6, 4 notes and 3, and have this one go and then that one go. It's a surprising and revelatory way of sequencing that I hadn't thought of before. Fiddling around with the repeats and the gates, you do stumble upon decent rhythms and melodies, but actually if you start to think about it a little bit more concisely, a little bit more on purpose, you can start to develop the way that these two sequences relate to each other. So just going back to the single pulse on each. That's just awesome. That is just completely awesome. I just love it. Okay, so what's the other one then that uses two oscillators, that starts to make two proper sequences? Well, it's set up in the same way, but it uses this parallel bit here. So I go back over to the settings mode, set the split point again, so let's just go nice and boringly in the middle, and then you don't set anything for the repeats, and then you can set a time division of how the clocking of sequence B refers to sequence A. Let's just keep it straight and simple for the moment, and I'll show you what I mean. So we're going to put it onto parallel mode, A over B. I've now got two red lights, and with a bit of luck we should get two things running simultaneously. So I've got one sequence going here, and this one, and the other one going there, together. Now if I change that to offset it a little bit, so let's just have the same four notes going on. See how that has changed things. Oops, need to put it 2 here. I do that wrong every time. Of course, you can stick in all your gates and all your repeats. So, you know, you can set that up to be however you want. So let's go over a bit further. We'll do a, I don't know, 5-note and 3-note kind of thing. Let's put that in and put it up really slow, something like that. And always remember to put it back. Now there's another secret switch that I can turn on, which feeds sequence B back into sequence A, which is quite nice. There's a secret special menu in here, which I'm not going to go into great deal of depth on in this video, where you can turn on a few settings on and off. If I go across to number 4, I think it is, and turn that on, that should start feeding this one into there. So if I just do a little bit of adjustment here, do that, then I'm going to put this really slow, or maybe not that slow, this slow, then hopefully this might be interesting. Put it back onto here. That's interesting in and of itself, but it wasn't actually what I was after. I'm not sure if you can see or hear quite what's happening. If I take out the second oscillator, this is now transposing this sequence. How flippin' cool is that? Right, one more little trick, and that's going to be to introduce a little bit of MIDI via the use of this little fella here. So there's nothing remarkable about this, I suppose. There are hidden menus within the M185 to do with MIDI reset and MIDI velocity, but I just want to keep things simple at the moment and just demonstrate MIDI coming out of here, output, output, MIDI output, through one of our magic TRS adapters, and hopefully into the sculpt. So with a bit of luck, just plugging that in and setting it to play, let's put it back to something sensible. Hey, see, easy. Easy peasy. Let's try a little bit of MIDI Sync. MIDI Sync. So there you are, that's enough. That's enough, I think. There's more stuff in here. You can change individual velocity of the individual notes over MIDI. You can get into programming gate patterns yourself. It also has a bunch of scales packed in, so you can change the scaling of the pitch output. You can also have it to no scaling at all, so you can just pitch however you wish. But ultimately what I'm finding with the M185 is just an enormous amount of fun. I mean, when you set a sequencer, you set up your standard 8 notes, 12 notes, 16 notes on a Eurorack. It goes round and you play with other things. You play with the sound design. You play with the patch in a different way. And your focus becomes about shaping the sound rather, perhaps, than the melody. With this fella, it's all about the melody. It's all about the rhythm. You play with that rhythm. You get stuck into those gates and those repeats and you start bringing stuff out. And then you find a different sequence. And then you find a different sequence. And that's interesting. That's something I've not really done in Eurorack before. You know, I often find myself at the point where, well, I'm trying out any synth really. I just stick on an arpeggiator. Stick on an arpeggiator, then I can play with the sounds and I'm not bothered about the melody. With this, I get far more bothered about it. And it's interesting. It develops stuff. It's also easy to get lost to a degree because you can add in repeats and then it's not really timing right until you then hit upon another sweet spot. So there are spaces in it where it's just kind of, it's going round and it's not really doing everything you want it to do, but it's just a matter of making adjustments and thinking about it a little bit, and then you can latch into another place that it grooves and then it starts spinning round and then you go, well, that's just amazing. The versatility with the 2 channels is, again, something I've not come across before in a regular Eurorack sequencer, and it does give you a whole extra avenue. I mean, the fact you can run round and then just do that little bit at the end. I love that. That's just brilliant. And that's just using one note, one repeat, one gate. That in of itself is just genius. So yeah, I like that. There's a lot to like about it, an awful lot. So am I able to point out anything that I don't perhaps quite like? Well, yeah, a little bit. The sliders, probably my biggest criticism overall, is that it's not always, you're not entirely sure where the sliders are sometimes. There's no line upon it. You've got a black slider upon a black background and you're trying to line it up to make sure it's in the right place. So just having like a white line across the top or some kind of cap on it so you can see it so it stands out better against the black, that would be useful. I have looked into getting caps for these. I can't find any. I can get caps for different sliders, these sorts of sliders, but I can't seem to find anything which is going to fit on this, but I will keep looking. Otherwise, bit of Tip-X, right? Bit of Tip-X across the top of that might show you exactly where it is. So sometimes it's not so easy to see where that slider is. You kind of have to feel your way into it. Sometimes the pitch is not always exactly where it should be. You can find a note and then the note might drift off to another note. Little things like that. It does have some quirks, particularly if you plug in clock from somewhere else. It will often fall over itself and it's not entirely sure what it's doing, so it will glitch or move a step on. I've found that if I've got clock coming in, I need to turn the tempo all the way down to 0, otherwise it just occasionally seems to find a skip. So there are little bits and pieces. I mean, Jake has released a number of firmware updates since I got the original, and each one has improved various aspects of it, which is great. And I imagine continuing development will also bring in more little bug squashes and fixes and a little bit of improvement upon the overall stability. It also took me a little bit of time to navigate my way through the manual, because it's not, and you know my relationship with manuals and manufacturers who write manuals about the gear that they know very well and don't quite necessarily appreciate that someone coming to their module is coming with none of the background knowledge to what it is all about. So it took me a while to understand what the menu system meant, and so I got myself a little bit tied up in knots. But it's actually easy once you get there. You just hold the red button, it does a little dance, and then you have 8 options that you navigate with these buttons here, and you press a button and it makes it happen. It turns it on and off. It's kind of that simple. I mean, there are some things like the scale mode that you go into, and then you have another menu, and I can select a whole load of different scales within that menu. But it's simple. There's no screen. They're not really digging down too far. You just have to give it a little bit of thought, and then once you're over the hump of what, then it all starts to make sense. So that's good. So those are only really, small gripes on otherwise a sequencer that's absolutely as good and as amazing as I imagine it would be. As soon as I saw that appear, I went, that's the one. That's what I want. I want that sequencer. And I purchased it. And that doesn't often happen to me as far as modules go. So it absolutely fulfills its brief, its objectives. It completely inhabits the space that I wanted to put in some essentially TB303 style sequencing. I just wanted a sequencer where I could turn notes on and off. This is that sequencer, but with a whole load of more stuff in there as well. And to develop from an 8-step into some kind of elongated 64-step sequence that's just repeating and moving and changing. Oh, it's a joy. It's a joy. Flipping chickens. So there you are, the RYK Modular M185 sequencer. Fantastic. And if you've enjoyed this video, of this review, then check out my other ones in the channel. Maybe think about subscribing. That would be cool. If you've really liked it, then pop on over to Patreon and throw me a couple of quid. That's always appreciated. Lots more reviews to come. Loads of stuff in the channel about modular, about synths, about audio interfaces, MIDI controllers, software, hardware, and all that jazz. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.